I guess we need to say a few words to R.I.P. James Bond. Lived a good 60 years of life on film, but now you've become streamer slop. R.I.P.
Oh, yeah. Is it gonna get the Star Wars treatment basically, where it's just like fucking endless, like, I don't know, TV shows and spin-offs, and I just want the Q spin-off.
Well, let's give a little bit more context, right, to what happened in the idea that James Bond, this amazing piece of IP that has existed for 60 plus years.
Great guy, got me my start in showbiz.
Yeah.
Help me move.
But the Broccoli family that has always had a hand in creative decisions, choices, green lighting certain things, lost their control of that. And by lost, we mean they got paid $1 billion to give those rights to Amazon.
And context to Geoff's context, the long-standing producer of the franchise is a woman named Barbara Broccoli. She is the daughter of Albert Broccoli, who was the original producer on the film franchise, and they've always had a degree of executive creative control over it. Since Amazon took over MGM, they've been kind of trying to shoehorn them out so that they can develop more of a universe around James Bond. Not to say that the Broccoli's are like protective of the brand. There's a lot of shit with James Bond on it, but it hasn't had TV shows and spin-offs and prequels like many other large-scale franchises have over the last 20 years or so.
Well, if I know one thing about James Bond is that you never want to hold him hostage, and that's what Amazon's been doing. He's going to make him real mad. He's going to go after everyone in that corporation.
Yeah, and you want to die another day on that hill.
Did I ever tell you guys that my dad used to, like, because he was a big James Bond fan, obviously, or is, and he would tell me that the Broccoli family is the family that invented broccoli, and that's how they got all their money. And I was like, when I was way too old, I actually Googled this. I was like, there's no way that's right, because, like, you know, synthetic farming exists, like goods exist. You can invent a crop. There's like 1 billion types of apples now. But I Googled this, and it's like, oh, the first known sighting of broccoli in like any sort of writing was like 4,000 years ago in like ancient Greece.
The lies we tell our kids to get them to eat vegetables.
But didn't work. And he hates broccoli. That's the worst part.
I guess from our perspective, as we start to see James Bond go from a movie sort of focused IP to TV, but at a price, I'm curious, as you guys sort of think about it, if you see this as something that is exciting or, a little bit sad as far as like seeing someone sort of, have their price.
I think we've seen this with Disney Plus already and how they've treated Marvel and Star Wars and needing to fill content on a large streaming service. And when they first started doing Marvel shows, they stood on stage and they presented the first couple of them, like WandaVision and Falcon and Winter Soldier. And they're like, these are standalone things.
Right.
These do not affect the movies. These are their own things. You don't need to know one to know the other. And that's gone by the wayside. You very much have to know TV to know the movies and vice versa. Even with Star Wars, it's just there's like 2 to 3 a year now. We're seeing film adaptations being made of the Disney Plus Star Wars shows already. And it just kind of... it convolutes and it condenses the brand, and these things don't feel like events. With Bond, even if they weren't the best movies, they were always really well made. I don't think you'll get a guy like Sam Mendes to helm one of these again.
No.
I don't think you're going to see a situation where there's not over fan service. Just to give an example of that, when they made Skyfall, the producers really wanted Sean Connery to play this character who was the groundskeeper of Skyfall Manor, and Barbara Broccoli pushed back and was like, no, we can't do like a gimmick or a stunt cast, and they ended up giving the role to Albert Finney, this legendary British actor. And I just don't think you're going to see that kind of restraint with it anymore. I think you're going to see a lot more winking and nodding to the camera, and I think it's just going to be it's going to be prequels, it's going to be young M. If the idea is that the mantle of 007 is passed down, that Pierce Brosnan's going to pop up in something as like an older agent. I think that it's not going to have that mystique as these big tentpole pictures anymore.
The dream of every young British actor is to one day get the tap that you will become the next James Bond.
And now they all can.
Exactly. And let me be clear, we're not an anti-Pierce Brosnan podcast. We just love him a little bit too much and respect him a little bit too
love
much.
Thomas Crown Affair so damn much.
They were so afraid that Idris Elba could potentially become the next James Bond that they dumped the entire franchise.
Well, here's the funny thing, and we're recording this the week of the livery reveals for F1.
Where is this going to go?
What is this podcast about again?
They made a joke about Idris Elba being there and being the next James Bond, and then Jack Whitehall was like, "Oh, that wasn't really well received." So then he went to Martin from the F1 broadcast booth, and he was like, "Oh, that's who I meant," sort of thing. And it's wild.
Wow.
I have such mixed feelings about being protective of certain fandoms and stuff like that. And I hope that Amazon is respectful of this very large legacy that's associated with James Bond. And I think we all want that as well. But there is sort of a part of me that's like, okay, I can't wait to see James Bond on a cereal box and be like, that's canon. That's part of the James Bond
Whatever
universe.
TikToker is getting promoted on Amazon Music is doing the next theme.
Oh my God.
You were podcasting with your pals the other day.
Hello, passengers, and welcome aboard the TV Pilot's License with service to Letterkenny, Ontario. We ask that you please fasten your headphones, secure your podcasting device, and remember, you may have flown before, and we want to get this flight going. So pitter-patter, let's get out.
Welcome to the TV Pilot's License. My name is Geoff Kerbis, joined by Rich Inman and Max Singer. How you boys doing today?
Oh, if we're talking flights in Ontario right now, we're definitely topical, and I think if there is an actual landing strip in Letterkenny, it is a grown-over soccer field that people just park their planes at.
Max, how are you, bud?
Yeah, I'm picturing the landing strip from Mr. Deeds in like rural New Hampshire, where it's just one guy swinging a sock over his head to bring the choppers in.
Well, boys, this week, coming the day after the United States has lost to Canada in the Four Nations face-off, we have decided to become a Canadian podcast just for this episode and talk about a beloved property known as Letterkenny. But before we do so, Max, can you tell folks what this podcast is all about?
Here at TV Pilot's License, we break down and analyze the pilot episodes of some of TV's most famous, or in some cases, infamous shows. We learn more about how these shows came to be and were originally made, if they're effective pilot episodes and making us want to watch more, and if they can be made today. Go back and stream our old episodes from wherever you listen to podcasts. Check us out on YouTube and TikTok to see our smiling faces. And if it is your first time flying with us, then welcome aboard.
And Rich, what is your question of the week?
Well, as a fan of Letterkenny, you know that the entire show revolves around a couple categories of human beings in the town. The Hicks, the Skids, the youth group people, the hockey players, the people who work at Modine's, and Mennonites. And I want to know, not yourself, your other two co-pilots, what would you say they would be if we all lived in a small town together?
All right, I'll kick us off. So, Rich, I think for giggles, you would go to the youth group. I do. I think purely just for laughs, you'd just be sitting in the back, watching over, getting all the laughs from the pastor, and like watching the guys be on Grindr on their phones and be like, you know what, good for you for like knowing what you're into.
Very progressive.
And then like, I know you like a good song here and there, so like there's a little bit of singing as well, so that's always fun. And then Max, I'm seeing you at Modine's. I'm seeing you chilling at the bar. They probably have some trivia like once a week that you're going to be enjoying. You're a big trivia man. And hey, they might have a nice tasty beverage here or there as well.
Yeah,
Max, what about yourself?
Yeah, I'll take a crack at this. Jeff, I would say you'd be with the hockey players. You're more of a fitness dude with a little bit of flow in terms of your hair. I think that you can get a nice backwards hat and some shades and just really rock that hockey player build that we saw in this pilot. Rich, I'm putting you at the Hicks just because I could see you really lounging out by a farm stand and having a nice chill day.
Yeah, you know me.
Rich, what about you?
So I'm thinking Max is with the crew over at Modine's. I think that it is a it's a hard-working team, but also they're absolutely shit-canned, and they know everything that's going on in the city. And Geoff, I think you're going to have a relapse from too much pre-workout and end up with the skids.
Oh, my God.
Your love of EDM and meth can only take you so far,
yeah.
Geoff.
You know, if you listen to this podcast, you know if there's someone who loves EDM, it is me, Geoff Kerbis. Well, Rich, thank you so much for that question of the week. Let's talk a little bit more about Letterkenny. But before we do so, let's talk about a quick synopsis of the show. A quick-witted, fast-paced, snappy comedy about rural folk getting by in a small town. That's really quick,
Sure.
and that is extremely bare bones. But Max, can you tell us a little bit more about how this show was made?
Today we are talking about the pilot of Letterkenny titled Ain't No Reason to Get Excited, which originally aired on February 7th, 2016 on the Canadian channel Crave. We talk about the show's creator, Keeso, a little bit today. Keeso is a Canadian actor who serves as today's show's creator, lead actor, and co-writer. As an actor, he starred in the Canadian series Monster Warriors in 1902, as well as portraying hockey legend Don Cherry in 2 different web series.
What?
In the U.S., he is known for roles in the films I Love You, Beth Cooper, Elysian, and the 2014 Godzilla. Based on Keeso's hometown of Listowel, Ontario, the show's origins stem from a 2013 web series, Letterkenny Problems, in which Keeso and actor Nathan Dales, Daryl in today's pilot, would stand in various locations trading off one-liners. The series was nominated for a Canadian Screen Award in 2014 for Best Original Series created for digital media. In March of 2015, Canadian network Crave orders development of a scripted series adaptation, with Keeso working alongside actor, writer, director Jacob Tierney, who directed today's pilot and appears throughout the series as Pastor Glenn. The show was actually the first original ever made for Crave. Together, the 2 are the show's main writers, helming all of Season 1. After finding success in Canada, Crave claimed that a third of the channel's subscribers watched the show. Letterkenny made its way across the border, streaming on Hulu, beginning in July of 2018.
When I tell you the stranglehold that Letterkenny Problems, the web series, had on us in our senior year of college, it is understated. It was also very strange that I could understand everything that they were saying, because it felt like an entirely different language with just the hockey terminology. And what do you think of that?
Was there a stranglehold I missed? I knew you 2 senior year of college. This is the first time I have ever seen anything associated with this show.
Oh, really?
See, this was a show for me that popped up during the pandemic, as like I heard a lot of people talking about like, oh, have you seen Letterkenny? Oh, have you seen Letterkenny? And I mean, let's just jump into this pilot. This pilot is extremely unique. And
I'm
Rich,
still
I'm
mad
glad
I wasn't a part of the stranglehold.
I'm sorry.
He's into a little bit of light choking. Okay.
Oh, wow. Wow.
As far as this
wow,
show,
it is
though,
10 a.m.
But Rich, I'm really glad that you brought up how they talk, because this show does have a very unique cadence in the way that lines are delivered, even in the way that we're introduced to characters as it starts. Like we see Jared Keeso's character, and he gives us like one line that if you are not familiar with this web series, you're like, what in the fuck is happening?
Right.
It's a nice little ode to the web series, but then we're just like, okay, that's all the context you need. We're in.
Yeah, that was kind of a thing that doing the research after watching it threw me for a loop, because I was expecting confessionals to be a larger part of this pilot. I thought this was going to be like a small town show where we do these confessionals with townsfolk and we get to know people, and not knowing the style of comedy in the web series, very like stand and deliver, I felt like I was getting dropped into an inside joke that I was missing out on, and I felt like I was trying to play catch up throughout watching this.
That makes sense. I mean, the one Letterkenny Problems video that I can like really pinpoint as like, oh my god, this is unlike anything I've seen. It's unlike any way I've seen people talk. Was this one with this is when they like made friends with Trevor Wilson, who's a terrific stand-up comedian. He plays Squirrely Dan. They're having this game of catch in their backyard, and Trevor Wilson starts talking about how he went on a date the night before and some girl put a finger in his ass, and everyone else was so uncomfortable that the three-way game of catch just became between the other two people. Just like a passive-aggressive like game of catch. And it just felt like, oh, this is like Canadian mumblecore almost.
The thing that it reminds me of a lot is sort of when you watch British comedy, right? British television. There's a pace to it that is unlike stuff that you normally see in the US. Like, and it's very intent. It's very deliberate. It's almost, it's almost musical in the way that they do their cadence of just like, it goes. This is great podcasting, but it's like da 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 versus like if you think about like a U.S. joke, there's a lot of pausing. There is a lot of, there's a lot of like staring or looking at the screen. This is something that if you just listen to the show, I don't think you're losing out on that much because they say everything that is happening on screen, but with some sort of humor behind it. In every single joke that we get for the most part.
It's like purposeful non-action, basically. Like every single scene feels like an oil painting that's talking, where they're like not really moving all that much. There's not a lot like in the cold open of the show. It's actually word for word from from one of the Letterkenny Problems like web series videos. That exact scene happens with like the two hockey players and like them talking shit and everything. That is precisely one of the videos, but they never stand up. They never move. Like the only action you really get is the two hockey players going tarps off, taking their shirts off. And yeah, I mean, it is something that like has tickled, like the patter of it has tickled a lot of people that I was not expecting. Like I would have not have like that. When I saw the Letterkenny Problems videos, I was like, "Oh, this is like for me. I understand hockey lingo. I understand Canadian slang, etc. The euphemisms and idioms that they use are absolutely hysterical." I'm like, "This is for no one." And then once it hit Hulu, I had friends who I never would have expected to be into the show all of a sudden only talking like that.
Yeah, Max, I'm curious from your perspective, since you are going into this show extremely fresh, right? Mm-hmm. Like, as far as the show itself, we get an extremely loose plot as well. Like, our A plot for the show is very much almost non-existent. The B plot, I'm still searching for it. Yeah. I put out missing MIA signs. I'm curious from your viewpoint, sort of what you thought of our A plot in general.
Geoff, I'm sorry. Is it a Canadian thing that you keep calling it the A plot today?
God damn it.
To your point, though, it is a very loose structured show. It is essentially that Wade, this main character played by Keeso, has lost a step. He's gone through a breakup. He's not himself. And we sort of pass Wayne along the supporting cast, and each person has a moment to try to help Wade get his groove back, to help get the old Wade back, and they go about it in their own individual ways. The hardest part for me, though, with this pilot is that the first 4 or 5 scenes are all kind of riffs on the same scene, which is some combination of characters sitting or standing. It's a wide shot frame where everyone's in camera, and we just kind of talk. And it takes a while before we break from that. And once we start getting into new locations, once we start to kind of break from the framing and bring in more people, I start to get a little bit more interested. But I think that this is a really slow burn if you are used to pilots that very much are, even for sitcoms, giving you a main character, giving you their POV, because like we don't really know Wade's POV. He's a very laid back protagonist. His worldview is not really established in this episode. And so if you're used to that, if you're used to this is an inciting incident, this is what's different about today, this is what's sending this person on their journey, whatever it is, there's no, Joel McHale got disbarred in Community, and so he's going to community college. There's no, it's someone's first day at a new place. There's no real why is today different,
I guess,
in Letterkenny.
If I did have to pick one, it is, I guess, toward the end where Wayne decides he wants to fight again. Like, he just like has that, and fighting is a huge plot element in almost every episode of this 12-season show.
Well, that's why I say it's about Wade getting its groove back. It's everyone's
right.
going to help this person along the way to rediscover himself, and by the end, we see, this drunken, violent street brawl that is, him getting his groove back, and like that's the old Wayne again.
Yeah.
Well, it is interesting to watch this and think of it more as an ensemble comedy than it is like a traditional comedy, right? Of like seeing the character. It's like it does remind me of like a one-man show of sorts, of like, oh, here are all the characters that live in this fictional town, and like how they all are slightly different. They all are unique and very different in like how they go about. Like, we talked about these crews that exist right out there in Letterkenny, but like even amongst some of the people in these crews, we're like, holy shit, like there is some depth to these people, that this pilot, rather than exploring our protagonists, is like, let's talk about the people that surround them, and you'll slowly learn about this person themselves.
Yeah.
I'm curious, because this is, as we said, there's not really a gigantic plot. There's not a ton to sink your teeth into. Were there any particular scenes that you were like, wow, okay, this is really fun, or this is really interesting, or this is where I started to identify, like, I might be into this, or this was a unique choice?
I'm curious to hear Max's, as this is the first time you've seen anything Letterkenny, if there is anything that just stood out that was like, oh, I get why people like this, or like, I do want to see, I'm getting like kind of addicted to the way these people talk.
I think for me, the moment where it does start to come together and I understand the bigger picture is the second time that we're in Modine's, because one, we're now establishing this is a main location for the show. It's like a central meeting spot where action is going to revolve around, and we have every single group colliding. So it's like we've gone through these scenes where we meet our characters. We meet our hockey players. We meet our skids having their techno rave outside of the church. We meet our Christians through the youth group, where we have a pastor just rip and dig. Getting the didgeridoo in rural Ontario was a nice little touch. But we bring everyone together that second time in Modine's. It starts to become, okay, how do all of these groups play off of each other? It's not just about Wayne. It's how do hockey players and Christians talk to each other. It's how do skids talk to hockey players? How do Hicks talk to Christians? And that becomes very traditional sitcom of like, we've got four people in a room and we want to see how all of them could do scenes together. And that's kind of where I start to see Letterkenny's wheels turning. It feels so indebted to things like SCTV, Mackenzie Brothers, even like Christopher Guest films. He's not Canadian, but a lot of his ensemble is, where they're just these very slice of life, down home, eccentric character kind of things. That being a bigger version, I think Letterkenny's a little bit more subdued, probably because it was made for web originally. They're trying to keep that charm. But I think that you could definitely look to those things as like being the show's North Star.
Max, if I would tell you that for Letterkenny tickles the same thing in my brain that King of the Hill does, in the sense that you really appreciate the way that all the characters talk to each other, and the banal isn't something to avoid, it's something to dive deeper into. And that's what I feel about, the ensemble of Hank Hill, Bill, Dale, and Boomhauer. And I think that extends into this too, where it's like, yeah, we don't necessarily want an inciting incident. There's going to be some. There's certainly going to be some. Most of them are resolved by violence. And to be fair, like a lot of the King of the Hill episodes where Hank has to solve a problem, a lot of times they're like him stepping up to someone saying, I'm going to kick your ass. So it's like it is very, very similar in the way that they solve things, if that bridges the gap a little bit.
The thing that I find super interesting about this pilot is the scenes that I look at and I'm like, wow, these are great, are the ones, Max, very similar to you, when we start to like see how our protagonist interacts with a group of characters that is not his main crew, right? Like the meth heads, that or this the skids that we see, or like seeing that youth group scene. Those scenes are insane to me. But the thing that happens to me while watching this pilot is, Rich, you compared it to King of the Hill. I'm going to compare it to Everybody Loves Raymond, the Canadian version of Everybody Loves Raymond, because we took someone's material that already existed and we said, hey, what if we turned it into a TV show and gave it a little bit of budget and also explored that universe a little bit? Now, while the pilot of Everybody Loves Raymond just revolves around basically 3 different sets of scenery, this revolves around 4, you know, but like we have those scenes at the vegetable stand that are very clearly like, hey, this was a story that already was built. The delivery is like seamless and it feels like worn in, but at the same time, it's great. It's engaging. It's quick. It's peppy. There's parts about this pilot that I just sort of look at and I'm like, wow, that was great. And then there's parts of it where I'm like, we need to wear this a little bit more. We need to make this feel a little bit, everyone feel a little bit more comfortable that this is maybe a little bit of a bigger platform than they're used to.
But I think it's because a TV pilot and a web series and a short are very different things. It's this episode is this crew learning how do we take, and I don't know how long Letterkenny Problems was on YouTube, but I can't imagine there were more than a few minutes at a time. It's how can we take something that is short form, stand and deliver comedy, and turn it into a 22-minute episode of narrative structured TV. And so I don't think we necessarily see it firing at the gears fully turning just yet. But I think you're right, Jeff, in that you do see the skeleton beginning to form. You can see moments that you like, interactions you like, but I think this is very much these people learning how to structure a TV show.
Yeah, I'm curious for you two, because we talked about loose structure. We talked about how this is about like finding your groove again after a breakup, trying to find what your next step is going to be after you've lost a little bit of your identity. This pilot ends with Rich, a fight and someone getting their mojo back in this instance. And I'm curious, Max, as you sort of delve into this, do you think this is a good resolution? Is this a resolution that opens itself up to more episodes? Or do you feel it's like, okay, cool, this was a web short that like I watched and it was a one-timer?
I think it works as far as getting us on board with the protagonist. If the whole thing is this guy has lost something in his life and we have to help him get it back, we succeed in doing so. We see that, through the advice of Katie, he has the confidence to, take out this outsider. It's also important that it's not someone from any of the groups. He fights a city slicker. He fights an outsider. He fights someone that's not any of the 4 groups that we introduce up top. And he gets this groove back. We get what felt to be very much like the small town Ontario version of Welcome to the OC, bitch, and Welcome to fucking Letterkenny after he slugs a dude. It was super reminiscent of Luke in the OC pilot, which I kind of like. I'll talk a little bit more about something in that vein in my stuff I loved later on. But then this does the most pilot thing possible, which is that we end up back where we started. This show ends with sitting around hanging out at the produce stand, and it ends with sitting around hanging out at the produce stand. For all of its stuff in the middle that it's figuring out, Letterkenny knows how to bookend and have you end up in the same place, except this time when the hockey players come around with Katie, they are cool with Wayne. Something has changed, that now there's a new relationship that's been formed. We are in a different place than where we started.
Rich, I'm curious from your perspective as well, like thinking of this almost from that pilot writing perspective, how you think this does.
You know what? It is something that kind of bucks a lot of the expectations of sitcom writing. It is not something that, like, 1,000%, if you tried to pitch this cold to a network in the US, it would be, before you even got done with your pitch, everyone would have left the room. It is not something that translates well to describing it, I would say. it is something that became kind of a cult classic web series video. There is a very specific way they all talk to each other, which is something that you need. I kind of liken that a little bit to Broad City, where they're like, there is a very specific language that that the two main characters have, and you
also a thing that evolved out of a web series into a full-length pilot. So I think actually Broad City is a really adept comparison for this, Rich.
Thank you. I think it's just you. In the same way that a lot of people like specific podcasts because of the way the hosts talk to each other, like I got addicted to listening to Las Culturistas because the way that Bowen and Matt talk to each other is like, it's like, oh my God, I'm witnessing like one of the most chemistry-filled friendships of all time, with their podcast, and they're so funny and they're so stupid together. Like that is what people want, and Letterkenny just captures that in a way that's difficult to bottle and describe. And it's extending now through its spin-off series Shoresy. Shoresy is also very good. It's a similar fashion. I would say it's a little bit looser than the very strict like Letterkenny, like, all right, have them stationary, this is what we're doing right now, kind of like all the dialogue is going to take place without movement kind of a thing. It's but yeah, I think people just find it more enticing just because of the way they talk, and I think that's number one a testament to the writing, but also the acting. Like you have to be able to talk like that. You have to be fast. You have to be like, it's not like a rap or anything like that, but it's like it is a quick way to talk to each other.
And if you like how we talk, make sure to subscribe anywhere that you listen to podcasts. I mean, that is sort of this pilot as a whole. I want to jump into things that we love, things that you want to give a little bit more shine that you enjoyed about this pilot. Max, as your first timer, what are you thinking?
Something that I actually liked about this pilot was in the second Modine's bar scene, there's a lot of pop culture references as insults used by the hockey players.
Yep.
They make references to One Tree Hill, Friday Night Lights. They call the city boy Lemony Snicket, which I thought was very funny. And part of the reason I dug this so much is that because it felt very much like they were trying to live vicariously through these other popular teen soaps. In a way, even Wade's line that feels very referential to the OC. These are people who are in a very small town whose exposure to the outside world probably would be through these types of like big popular teen shows.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's very relatable. Even if you don't understand the rural Ontario of it all, you may have been someone who lived in a small town who saw these shows on the WB and NBC when you were a teenager as aspirational and as like your cultural beacons. And I think that's maybe the most universal thing about Letterkenny.
Definitely.
Rich, what about yourself?
I love that they just burned a hole in the idiom dictionary in the script. It is like, it is really informing a lot of the. I could definitely see if I was living in Ontario or if I was living in a small town or something like this, and this hit the scene. Better believe I'm talking Tilly, tarps off, spitter, pitter patter, full tilt like a Peterbilt, Bieber eyes, ripping darts, anything that I could possibly say like a Letterkenny character, I'm doing. Rippin' Didge, as Max mentioned, that one really got a hard chuckle out of me. It is a crazy line, but every single thing is like its own, I don't know, offshoot of the English language.
Yeah, and for myself, there's one performance in this pilot that really just stands out to me as far as like someone just came in and was like, I'm going to nail this, and people are either going to really vibe with it or not, and that's Jacob Tierney as Glenn. It was such a, he had an image of what he wanted the character to be like, how he wanted it to be played on screen, and like the monologue he gives when he's speaking to his girlfriend is one of the I have never I was just
crazy.
cracking up. It's insane. It's literally insane. But like also the line delivery of like talking about the didgeridoo is like it's just so insane. The choices were wild, but also I couldn't imagine them being done another way. And that speaks to just really owning the portrayal of someone. If you're like, oh yeah, I can only picture this man playing Glenn after watching this pilot. What about wait a minute moments? What about things that caused you pause? We already had some questions about the pacing of this pilot, some of the scenes itself, but I want to see if there's anything that you might want to speak about.
Yeah, I think for me, seeing the pilot be fairly homophobic in tone is not true to the absolute rest of the series, which I thought was interesting. I feel like that might have been a note from the network, or like it almost makes like because the show, it gets extremely gay. Like half the town is gay by the time you hit the third season. It's crazy. It's also there's also like a surprising amount of of native representation in the First Nations in Canada, like on the show, and that gets no shine here so far. It gets very gay and very native, and I think that's what feels so cool about the show as it continues. But the first episode being this homophobic is fascinating.
The thing that I find interesting about that is they even make a joke in the middle of the show about there being a gay character.
Yeah,
Rold.
Yeah,
Rold being gay, and he's like basically is like, what the fuck? Like, why are we making fun of him for being gay?
Yep.
And it is interesting to see, Rich, as you said, it's interesting knowing and having greater context, but if we're watching it like a pilot, for those who might want to watch more, it does not represent the tone of the show as far as diversity as a whole.
I would definitely agree with that.
I think
Max, go for it.
I think for me, first exposure to this property in any way, I don't know how many of these characters or these groups we see appear in Letterkenny Problems. I felt like the sheer number of characters we met took away from my ability to understand character wants and desires from our core people. I don't feel like I walked away from this really knowing a lot about Daryl, about Katie, about Wade. I felt like I was getting introduced to a lot of supporting people for bits and riffs and funny moments, but it just felt a little bit overwhelming for me, and I didn't leave here being like, this is the person who I'm really on board with. A lot of the stuff with the skids, there's so many of them. There's so many of them, and I almost wish I was introduced to that circle through one person and then had that circle built out later in time, because I didn't leave here feeling like I knew whose point of view I wanted to follow, who I wanted to know more about in episodes 2 and beyond.
Max, I didn't know that you worked for Crave TV, because all those network notes, I think they clearly got.
Yeah.
And it does expand more in future episodes.
Well, it's not TV season 2 license, Rich.
Yeah.
Stay tuned for TV season 2 license.
For me, Max, I would agree with you. I think that when this pilot suffered from we have to show the network everything that they can be expecting in the groups of people that they can learn about if they decide to greenlight it for the first 9 episodes or whatever they were talking about. And that is something that we've seen with a lot of pilots, but it's up to the network and executives and producers and writers to sort of be like, hey, let's hone it in, or let's take these notes and do a good job with it. And we can definitely talk about it in a little bit, but spoiler alert, when we talk about the history of the show, they figured that out, and I think they received it well and made those adjustments as well. We do have one more question, gentlemen, and that is an in-flight question. And our in-flight question this week comes from Ben in Richmond, Virginia, who says, regarding Letterkenny, if you had to pick up this show and replant/reshoot it in a small town in America, where would it take place? So, gentlemen, I am asking you, let's get rural. Let's find a place that we think would make a captivating show as far as the American version of Letterkenny. Let's take it back from Canada.
All right, I got it.
Okay.
So
All right.
so there is a town when you are driving to Las Vegas that is right on the border of California and Nevada, where you could first get the casinos. It's called Prim. And every time I've driven to Vegas, when I see the lights, I think, oh, thank God, I'm finally here. Nope, it's Prim. And Prim is just this like tiny stop along the 15 where it's nothing. It's got like a casino that's called like the Golden Buffalo that has a roller coaster that you wouldn't get me to go on for $1 million. And there's just like a gas station across the street from it. And I would love to know what it's like to be in the town that tricks you into thinking you've reached Vegas when you still have an hour and a half to go on your drive.
The Mirage Town. Oh,
No, Vegas is the Mirage Town.
Oh, right. I think I gotta go with somewhere in rural Oregon, because I think comparison-wise from city to rural area, that is the largest difference in worldview, I would say. Like, rural Oregon feels like Arkansas. It is like it is so different. It is very gun nut. It is very like, it's extremely conservative. I think that would be, if we're comparing Letterkenny to like Toronto, I have to go somewhere out there. I was originally going to say somewhere in Arkansas because that feels like the most forgotten state. But Arkansas, I think, would be too similar from rural to like Little Rock or something like that. But yeah, Portland to rural Oregon would be a vast chasm of difference.
Yeah, and for myself, do you guys remember the show Nashville that had a time, and we'll probably do on this podcast at one point in time? I want to do Nashville, Indiana, which is stuck in the middle of Martinsville, Bloomington, and Columbus, Indiana. They have a little Nashville Opry. It is
Oh my God.
It's just this in the middle of nowhere.
I went to a bar dance or two there.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those things where I think that there's a really great opportunity of being like, okay, we're in the middle of like sort of this really weird triangle of culture that exists in Indiana, and then Indianapolis is an hour or so away, but there's no major highways that go through it.
Right.
It's a lot of cabins. There's just this opportunity that's associated with it where I'm just like, yeah, this is rural enough, but also there's enough like city people that could be going through for the day, or there's enough like, you know, not that I'm going to bash Martinsville, but there's a lot of history that's bad in Martinsville that maybe you should read or look into. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. The second choice was Orleans because I just love that name for a town. It's not New Orleans. It's the original Orleans.
It's the first one.
This is the first
That's
one.
not in France.
Well, Ben, thank you so much for that in-flight question. We'll talk a little bit more about how to submit those at the end of the show.
Yeah, let's just say you should shoot us another question.
Oh, hey. Well, let's talk about the history of the show. 12 seasons and 81 episodes. That includes also holiday specials, which this show became very famous for, including like an Easter special and Thanksgiving specials here and there. It was, as Max said, originally released on Crave, but now you can find this show entirely on Hulu.
Wait, Geoff, I'm sorry. That's 6.75 episodes a season. Is that Canadian episodes or U.S. episodes?
Rich did mention it, but the show does have a spinoff called Shoresy, which is having a new season actually released really soon, which is super duper exciting. You can find the show entirely in its entirety on DVD. As Max mentioned, this show was the most successful launch that Crave as a streaming network ever had. And as far as awards go, 49 nominations and 15 wins. That includes multiple Canadian Screen Awards as well as a few WGC screenwriting awards. But that is
what's their version of the MTV awards? Is do they get snowboards? Like what's
no snowboards, no galoshes. Could you imagine a trophy set of galoshes that just
the golden
those.
skate?
Well, that is the history of the show. Rich, it is time for your game of the week.
All right, you were quizzing your pals on Zoom the other day. It's time to learn a little bit more about the Great White North. It's Ontario trivia. I found a couple head-scratching trivia bits about Ontario, and I want to see if I can stump you both. Okay, Ontario is home to a mind-bending 250,000 lakes. Knowing that, how much of the world's fresh water supply is in Ontario? Is it A, 1%, B, 5%, C, 10%, D, 20%?
I'm gonna say B, 5%.
I'll say 20%.
Jeff, it is 20%. It is 20% of the entire planet's fresh water supplies in Ontario. It is so crazy. It has to be like a snow element. I have no idea why it's so much. But yeah, don't fuck with Canada because they control 1/5 of the world's fresh water. All right. Second question: the Toronto Maple Leafs Sports and Entertainment, the company that obviously owns the Maple Leafs, Raptors, Argonauts, and several other Toronto-based teams, are owned by several larger companies and billionaires, and also A, the Toronto Firefighters Union, B, the Toronto Electricians Union, C, the Toronto Teachers Union, D, all of the above.
I'm gonna say D. All of the above.
I am too. Let's pretend that they're all have a hand.
That is correct. That is owned by all of them. It is the Ontario Municipal
the Green Bay Packers of Toronto.
Yeah,
everybody gets a share.
They own. So it's like their. Oh God, what's the actual good version of a 401k? A pension? Yeah, it's owned by the
It's a co-op basically
from the Maple Leafs inception. They the Toronto municipal fuck I literally just said the word pension fund invested in the Maple Leafs as a franchise, and it has grown substantially. So I would imagine the pensions for all of these are in good hands now that the team is now that all those collective teams are probably worth like, I don't know, 10-15 billion dollars. But yeah, 5%. Thanks for playing Ontario trivia.
Rich, thank you so much. Well, gentlemen, our flight is starting to come to a land. But I have two questions for you as we come closer to the end of this episode of TV Pilot's License. And the first one is based off of the pilot and the pilot alone. Rich, I don't want to talk about the web series. I don't want to talk about Shoresy.
Sure.
I want to just talk about this. Would you watch more of Letterkenny? Would you say next episode and watch episode 2? And then the second question is, as we discussed, this is coming off of a web series, which is a very mid-2010s thing to say as far as television. A lot of TV, a lot of things were greenlit because someone made something funny that was on YouTube or somewhere else.
Sure.
Should we sort of go back to this trend? Should we go back to this trend of taking things that are shorter form and saying, let's expand it and let's dive into that universe a little bit deeper? Do we have space on television and streaming for that today? And Rich, I'm going to have you kick us off.
I would say, well, first of all, I'm watching more of this just because I have watched every single episode of this. It reaches the terminal velocity of binging pretty fast for me. It's very repetitive. The way that they do everything is very it gets a little tiring watching all of that in a row. I do think that there is a lot more space on TV for cult classics like this. It is not, I would say, prestige or premier television. I would not consider it a prestige comedy by any means. It is weird. It is like Canadian Napoleon Dynamite. It is of the time and place, and I definitely think there is more space for that. I do want to see more of what Jared Keeso and Jacob Tierney do together. I believe they're also the writers on Shoresy. But yeah, I mean, I would love to see what they can accomplish. But I mean, the fact that Shoresy got the green light in general, and this got 12 seasons, speaks to the staying power of that style of comedy writing.
Max, what about yourself?
This is unfortunately a pass for me. This pilot did not do enough to make me want to watch episode 2. However, I would imagine this is episodic. I do not see this being a serialized show. If you are listening, send me individual episodes. Change my mind. I'm challenging right now. This has had 81 episodes, as Geoff said. Find a couple that you think will change my mind and get me on board with this show, because the pilot didn't. As to your second question, I don't think we necessarily need to see direct one-to-one like adaptations of web series, but I do think we are seeing a trend over the last 10 or so years of people who are web creators getting the opportunity to do larger things on TV. I think about Rachel Bloom with Crazy Ex-Girlfriend.
Yep.
I think about Issa Rae with Insecure. I think about Quinta Brunson with Abbott Elementary. All people who were web creators who were able to springboard from web series to very commercially successful shows. All of those people are Emmy and Golden Globe winners for things they created, getting that opportunity. So I think that there are a lot of people right now who are making interesting stuff online. We don't need to see that project necessarily, but trust what they could do with support, with resources, and allowing new voices to emerge in the TV landscape.
Oh,
Yeah, and I'll follow up. I think that this is, Max, very much, as you said, this is not a show that you need to watch episodically, which is great, because sometimes it's fun to watch a show out of order because the plot that goes from episode to episode is extremely light on this show, and that's a good thing. This is a show that you can drop in on. This is a show that you can... if you're folding laundry, guess what? Great show. Because a lot of, as we said at the beginning, a lot of the comedy of the show is what you are listening to in the dialogue, as opposed to what you are watching on screen at all times. With that said, though, we are in such an interesting phase of media and original comedy, in the idea that you don't need to be on TV to be successful right now, which is great. But I think that the thing in the trap that a lot of executives are falling into is we're seeing people get stuck on the idea of, what if we just took a gigantic property and turned it into TV? Sort of going back to our first conversation that we had at the beginning of this episode. I'm putting a nice bow on this. And I am here to say
It's my favorite kind of pilot. We're back to the same topic.
We are in an age where there's so much creative stuff happening that there are a lot of new voices that can come in and create something really, really special. And I think we're starting to get there. I don't know if we're there just yet, but I hope that people can look back at the 2010s as like, hey, we tried this. We've sort of expected way too much of people who never wrote TV before to all deliver TV or all be the next, great big late night show because people thought they were funny on YouTube. Let's go a little bit smaller scale and give people an idea of like, hey, why don't you go and write a TV show or give us a pilot and pitch it? And please, Food Network, it doesn't just need to be you that takes all the YouTubers. Bravo, Fox, there's other places. Lifetime, you can also try your hand at this as well. But yeah, gentlemen, that is our flight. But before we go, I want to make sure that folks can find you wherever you are and wherever you want them to find you. Max, where can folks find you?
You can find me rip and dig on all things social media at Maxwell Singh.
You can find me pulling my pants all the way down to the ground at the urinal, and you can also find me on Instagram at Damn That's Rich. You can find original sketch comedy for Max and myself at Dadwagon Comedy on both Instagram and TikTok.
And you can find me with my tarp off, but if you are looking for me on social media, you can find me at RunJiffRun. If you're looking for the TV Pilot's License, you can find us anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can also see our smiling faces on YouTube and find us anywhere on social media, at least the platforms that are available to you. If you have a question at TV Pilot's License, if you have a question for the show or for our next episode, you can go on tvpilotslicense.com to submit an in-flight question. You can also shoot us a text or leave us a voicemail at 213-290-1713. Yes, calling us on the phone is scary, so just use your fingers to type those questions. Make sure to watch out for sneak previews of some of the stuff that we have coming up. As a little preview, we're going to go zoom next episode, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about F1. But with the plane landed and the seatbelt sign off, we look forward to flying the bright skies of the TV world with you soon. But until next time, keep your eyes on the sky and your fingers on the dial.
Pitter pat.